Character design is a tricky topic. While a lot of what you see on the internet is impressive drawing and rendering skills, the meat of character design is actually in the process of finding personalities worth investing time in. Character design isn't just drawing, it's actually finding something worth drawing. Finding something worth drawing so the rest of the world can find something interesting to invest their time and money on. You'll be watching, you'll be playing, you'll be reading about their actions, their ideas, their motives, their faults, and more. You'll be growing with them. They'll feed you ideas and thoughts about you in a reflective sort of way. They'll have performed what you might feel is the unthinkable, so you don't have to. They'll find reward, and in turn reward you with hope in your life. We use them to escape into a headspace we wish we could be like, before we retreat back to our usual daily grind. In this episode, we're going to explore a character from a rather large cast from my project, the EOS, the End of Summers. I'll walk you through the exploration process and explain what's going on, how to break down the character, how to break down parts of the character, and how to find a finish, what you're going through and what you're thinking about. I'll break it down into a few really simple steps that you actually have to engage in, and I'll explain that as I go. But if you follow those steps, you should be able to design any character you need. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need is a motivation. What's our story? Who's our focus? And what's their story purpose? What is their technical intent? Who are they in our list of archetypes? As well as their practical purpose within their world. In other words, what's X's purpose in life? What's their goals? What's their motivations? What drives them on a daily basis, etc. We can do this with a quick short paragraph, a few sentences that explains who they are in the story. You can use their age, their gender, their ethnicity, or other. Other being extra material that you find important to define who they are. It should explain what they do in their world, their personality, their personal motivations, and anything important they might contribute to. This is a starting point to get the creative gears spinning, but we will need more. So secondly, we'll want to build a character sheet. You can make your own, or you can download your typical RPG character sheet or story elements worksheet that you can find all over the internet. Start to fill it out with the easy, then figure everything else out. If you've done character building in a D&D game or in a video game, then you've got this. A lot of your motivation is going to come from the people around you, who you know. And knowing them, you'll know their purpose, their goals, their experiences, their beliefs. If you choose something random, you'll need to back it up with something credible or something known or experienced that helps make it that much more believable, or their motivations could lack a certain sincerity. You'll probably grab from several references, while there will be others you might have to make a total guess at. But in time, and with experience working with your characters, you'll figure things out. The lists you make will give your character more depth, which leads to a more complex personality, which also leads to greater chances of them making the right decisions for each character's personality and behavior. This list, as well as your initial paragraph, may shift a little or a lot during this process. As you humanize them, things will be more clear in how they behave, which is a culmination of everything in their life. The more you know, the easier things are to define for them. In my story, in book 1, we're following a group in an extreme RV, massive RV. There's lots of people in a relatively small space, lots of mixing of different personalities, good, not so good, not so compatible. With all the equipment that's on board and with what they use, there's a lot of moving parts that are easy to break or breakable, and a handyman is needed to fix whatever breaks. Enter Fletcher Simmons, a 47-year-old electrician turned mechanic from Huntsville, Alabama, cousin of Corey Keene of Keene Ramps in Long Beach. Fletch moved to LA many years ago and was a welder on the ramps for Keene. When he got a call from a guy named Ken Block over at this thing called Hoonigan, He needed an expert welder on a few special parts for a gig, and he took that gig, and he never looked back. He listens to Motorhead, Suicidal Tendencies, and anything else that's heavy on guitar from his youth. He's really talkative, and if you give him a little bit of alcohol, he's really talkative. He smokes dope a lot more than he probably should, but it keeps him focused on what he needs to do. He stays out of a lot of arguments. He loves freedom, but has some edginess towards authority figures. He loves his drones, named them after his mom's favorite TV characters, Lucy and Ethel from I Love Lucy. He values nature, cares for his friends, bends over backwards to help them out in any way possible, which is sort of a childhood trauma he carries with him. He doesn't really value himself so much, but he sees himself useful for others. He had a walkout dad when he was 11. That really messed him up good. He has his secrets, but is totally harmless and is not purposefully malicious or vindictive. He's a Pisces. He's 5'10", dirty blonde, Germanic descent. He's terrible with money, and I can keep going on and on and on about him. The purpose here, though, of why I'm saying all of this is he's a secondary character in the book, and I know that much about him as well as much, much more about my primary characters. Knowing all of this makes it a lot easier for me to use him in the story and get him to do what he should be doing based upon who he is and his personality. And that's what's going to make it easier for me as well to find the design in the drawings that I'm about to do and find the right visuals to match and marry this personality. Which leads us to number 3, finding really good reference and good motivation for your visuals. If you haven't seen or experienced much of what you think you're going to need, or your brain needs refreshing, fill the folder full of visual reference applicable to your design needs. And please be sure to stray away often to find other oddities you can possibly mix in. This is where new potential ideas usually spawn. I'm actually not in any need to find anything over the top since this is a secondary character and shouldn't stand out too much, or so much so that he becomes primary. So I start with something work-related, mechanic-looking, but southern. Overalls. His punk rock tendencies lead him to work boots, Doc Martin style, and he don't wear sleeves. All his shirts are sleeveless. But as I was looking, I thought, what about a mechanic jumpsuit? Tear off the sleeves and cuts the pant legs into shorts, way up to the knees. So now he's in a heavily modified jumpsuit. And of course he's going to need a mullet. So I get a few Tiger King images and then some. Toss those into the folder as well. I try out some bald heads, skinheads, and a few others as well into the folder just as a variety. But I like the idea of the mullet. There's so much playfulness in it, and I want this character to actually be playful and approachable. And I feel like making him into a skinhead is going to make him a more unapproachable character than not. Now, if I had no idea what to design, I'd be more liberal with many more options. But I know him all too well, and I don't need to look too far for my information. Now, my story has well over 40 actors. Spending too much time on any one of them at this point will bog everything down. So I set time limits, or milestones to reach, and stick with them to get everything designed and everyone designed within an efficient amount of time. I'll call it like 1 day, but it's really more like 2 days per character, but totally spread out. And what I mean is that it's broken up into many days, and each day I design at least 3 or 4 new characters. So I hope that makes sense. I'm always designing new characters, but I'm also designing those characters over several days. And so I have a lot of them going at once simultaneously, and some are getting finished while some are in the middle and some are getting started. Having that large rotation of characters at work, though, keeps me from getting too caught up into one thing. And again, with milestones set, there's no way that I can spend any more than a little bit of time with each particular character. And with those milestones that I set, it's 7 finished a week or 10 finished a week or whatever the number is at that point based upon other work that I have to do around this project. Currently, I'm about 70% finished with my list of at least 44 primary and secondary actors. Now, the tertiary characters are where everything really starts to look like I'm never going to get this thing done. But that's next on my list of priorities, and I'm only going to spend about maybe half a day on each so that I can get a lot of them done very quickly. So now this leads me into sketching into step number 4, which is primary iterations. To do this, I set up a movie player in the background and I play all the reference as a movie. I just let that scroll as a slideshow. That way I don't rely upon any one source of reference, but I sort of summarize through a lot of the visual ideas. Iterations are variations of the primary goal. Sometimes the design can be found in a few iterations, but often it will take many. From all the iterations, they are culled down into one smart and final design, the end product, picking the most direct and iconic bits and tossing everything else out. There is no waste in the iteration process, and there's no end to how many you can produce. Don't be precious and allow for error. Sometimes in our haste, we totally nail it. We let go just enough to get it more right than we did in all the other times that we were overthinking it. And the ones you don't use aren't really all that wasted either. These are personalities better used for something else to come, or inspiration for something bigger and better. With the design sketch determined, we move into step number 5, personality drawings and expressions. If the inspiration or inspirations for your character are still living, family or friend related, please visit with them to study them in different situations, to pull habits, gestures, expressions, sayings, their interaction with familiar surroundings, and so on, until you feel you have everything needed that gives your character believability, familiarity, and is clever or interesting to watch.
When finding poses for the personality sketches, think dramatic and push them a little further than your reference would actually show. Drawing is tricky when it comes to subtle. Drawing larger than life helps fix this problem. Draw more than enough poses, so you have to cut from the list. Otherwise, you're stuck with just a few, and they might not be dynamic enough. For these head iterations, I did not limit myself to one face and many haircuts. I kept changing everything in hopes of finding something I wasn't expecting, something bigger than I anticipated. You got to keep those design ideas loose and open in the very beginning in hope of finding that. With the facial expressions, I used this trick I was taught to start super simple, basically a stick figure face, then add the details in until it's fully resolved the way you need it. Any expression can be drawn with just dots and lines. The tricky part is maintaining the simplicity when rezzing up the image to complete it. The expressions I drew here are the ones you'll mostly see him in the book. It doesn't make any sense to make expressions that we'll never see him in. Although, if you don't have a script, you may not know which expressions he's going to fall into, but with some understanding of his emotional state, you kind of know the range that you'd be dealing with. To finish this version, I'm heavily leaning on my influences to finish and finalize this last image here. I'm referencing this particular piece of artwork from a Circle Jerks album from the 1980s, and I'm also referring to Wing-Shing Ma, comic artist extraordinaire, as my visual style guides, trying to keep the drawings legible, the lines energetic, and hatch lines sporadically placed whenever movement is involved. I'm looking for that raw and grittiness of that punk rock image, but the clean and easy to read quality of Wing-Shing Ma. I'll go over the step process for drawing these in part 2, along with the final render and the color scheme. To recap, here's a list of steps to take when building a character design. Number 1, use a motivational brief or description of the character. Number 2, build the character breakdown or personality sheet to further flesh out your character and bring depth to the personality. Number 3, use ample reference.
Don't try to just draw from your imagination at this point. Use reference to be inspired. Number 4, build on your iterative breakdown of the character. Do many different versions of the character until you find the attributes and the qualities that make up the final character that we're going to use. And number 5, build your design drawings and the personality sketches. And again, with the iterations, do many, many more than you actually needed so that you can cull the list down rather than just being stuck with a few that you may not be dynamic enough and may not be quite the personality you were looking for. With these steps accomplished, all that's left is to do the final render and solve the character's color scheme. In part 2, I will cover the drawing breakdown process more in depth, and I will demonstrate the final inked drawings and work out the character's colorways. This video is already longer than I anticipated, and part 2 is definitely needed. Good luck starting your character designs, and I look forward to showing you how to complete them in the next episode. Stay creative.